Welcome back. So it has been a while since I've done a just for fun video with me raving about stories that I just love to love. A couple weeks ago, we celebrated International K-Drama Day. So in belated celebration of that occasion, and as a Christmas present to myself, can we please talk about K-dramas? In this video, I'm going to do a speed run through the first 5 K-dramas that I ever watched. 5 shows, minute and a half each. Can we do it? Absolutely not. A minute and a half, guys. You even know me. This is gonna be fun. Number 1, or should I say number 5, The Impossible Heir. This was the first K-drama that I ever watched. It's kind of a corporate revenge drama sort of thing. We have this poor young genius, and we have this young, rich, but estranged from his family because he's illegitimate kid, and they team up to try and take over the rich kid's family's business from the inside. What I liked. So it focused on the bros, first of all. There wasn't a lot of annoying romance, which I really appreciated. I am a sucker for bromance, as you will hear in the rest of this video. Hypercompetence is always fun, watching really smart people do really smart things. And the thing that I probably appreciated most about the show was that it was very serious in tone. I have realized after watching a few Korean dramas, comedy does not work for me. I don't know if it's just like lost in translation or if it's just my sense of humor, but I don't tend to find the humor in these shows all that funny. So in hindsight, I appreciate that this show really didn't have any humor whatsoever. It was just super serious all the way through. What I did not like, they did add a girl near the beginning of the show to make it into a kind of triangle, I guess, but I just felt like she did not need to be there. Like, she didn't have much of a personality, for one thing. Her character was not one that you could be really invested in or get behind. Like, I just did not believe in her as a character at all. It's like she didn't really seem like she was that great of a person and didn't grow, like, at all over the course of the show. From a craft standpoint, I felt like there were a lot of things that were just generally underdeveloped. Characters had very clear goals, but their like deep internal motives and their backstories just could have used a little more fleshing out. For me, it felt like a lot of the characters were very emotionally inaccessible, very distant, and even at the end of it all, while it was an enjoyable ride, there wasn't a ton of depth to it. Alright, number 4. Goblin, also known as Guardian, the Great and Lonely God. Honestly, I would love to make just a whole video just about that show because I have so many thoughts and strong opinions, as I'm sure you can believe. But I will try and save some of those for that and rein myself in for this video in the interest of time. So, Goblin, a guy who was a general in like ancient Korea, so like 900 years ago, betrayed his selfish, irresponsible king, and as punishment he was executed with a sword, but he was made to live as an immortal being, a goblin, even though he just looks like a guy, with this invisible sword still in his chest, until he finally will meet the goblin bride, who will be able to pull out the sword and basically allow him to finally die. But now we're in the present day, and this goblin, of course, meets his goblin bride in the present, and it's a recipe for romance and for sort of disaster when you fall in love with the person who is supposed to kill you. So that's fun. What I liked about this show, it's pretty sweet, it's pretty clean. There were a lot of like really emotional moments. Like, I spent a lot of time crying watching this show, which for me is a win, because if a show doesn't make me feel and doesn't make me cry, then it's just a no-go. Absolute best part, romance. The whole urban fantasy putting mythical beings into the present day is just a recipe for golden plot. And the best example of that in this show is the amazingness of having a goblin have to live in the same house as a Grim Reaper, his unwanted tenant. Their dynamic in this show, guys, was the absolute best relationship, in my opinion, in the entire show. These guys had me actually laughing out loud. There's a part where Goblin asks Reaper how good his English is, and Reaper's response I must have watched like 8 times. I just got no end of amusement out of it. Reaper in general, his character was just top notch. I was easily the most invested in him. You just loved him so much, and you fall more in love with him as you watch him do his job as a Grim Reaper and realize that he's actually so good at it, and he's like the most tender and compassionate and kind and gentle Grim Reaper you could possibly imagine. I basically watched the show for him and for the Goblin Reaper dynamic. What I didn't like about this show, not enough of the Goblin Reaper dynamic. There was a lot of focus on the main romance between the 2 leads, and from the beginning I just could not get invested in that relationship, partly because there's a really weird age gap between them that I just could not get past. I mean, she's in high school when the show starts, and it's like, okay, I don't like this. There were a lot of times in all the plots where It seemed like things were actually ramping up and gonna get suspenseful, or like, okay, finally we have some intrigue or whatever, but then they would just sort of like undercut it or like resolve it way too quickly, and you're like, oh, there was the conflict. Okay, there it is, gone. The ending I have strong feelings about. I felt like it was a little bit of a fizzle, but I will save that for if I ever do a Goblin video. And yeah, just all in all, there were things that I loved, but there were also huge chunks that I just was really bored with, and we could have spent a little less time on those things. Number 3, Doom at your service. It's like an urban fantasy again about a girl who finds out that she's dying and sort of accidentally makes a deal with Doom to choose between saving herself and dooming everybody else, or like saving herself and dooming him. It's a little confusing. What I liked about this show, both leads were great. I was invested in them from the beginning and stayed invested all the way through. There were also like side plots and a side romance that I was like equally invested in, so that was cool because there was just nothing that really bored me. It's like more light and frothy, which is a nice change, but also had some like heavier emotional moments, and it did make me cry, so success. What I did not like. From a craft perspective, I felt like the magic rules of this show were just a little convoluted, and I could only recognize that because I've been in the position where you're like trying to make a premise work, and so you have your magic system, but then you have to make all these like little exceptions so that you can do the cute things that you want to do. Like, okay, so she made this wish, which works because it's his birthday. In exchange, she has to wish for Doom, but then she also gets her own wish. Until then, she won't have pain, which means she has to wear this red bracelet, but he has to recharge that every day. It was just like, this is cute, but also like so confusing, and I feel like it could just use a few more hours in the writing room. But that said, you just can't look too closely and then it's fine. Like, just don't think about it too much. The other thing I didn't love was that there were some kind of like weird statements being made about God in it, because they kind of incorporated this like mystical aspect with God, and even though it was like a very generic picture of a God, like not necessarily one that's attached to any particular faith, it's always annoying when you have these statements being made that are just like blatantly false that could be potentially confusing for someone. Number 2, the smile has left your eyes, also known as 100 million stars from the sky. Ooh, I have so many thoughts about this show, guys. It's not even funny. Okay, let's calm down. I need to just like start a podcast and then I can talk as long as I want. This show is completely different from the other ones. It's not fantasy at all. It's serious and it's weighty and it's ponderous and just deliciously heavy. You have this middle-aged detective who's investigating this murder, and this young guy keeps like popping up as part of the murder investigation, and eventually the young guy is becoming more and more involved with the detective's younger sister, who he's very protective of. Complications are going to ensue. What I liked: writing, first of all, so subtle, not overdone. Character felt really consistent and well written. The story itself was really intriguing. It really kept you hooked. It was also phenomenally acted. Song-guk, like, he just did an incredible job. So subtle, he was so enigmatic, did all of his acting with like his eyes and like one side of his mouth. Just really compelling performances. I think this was perhaps the most romantic show that I've ever seen, and actually most romantic just story in general that I've experienced. There was something so beautiful about it, and so almost like Christ-like in this idea of someone who is so broken and has absolutely nothing to offer, and yet someone else chooses to come alongside them with unconditional love. The transformation that can happen in a person when unconditional love steps in is just like, I mean, that's exactly what Jesus did for us. That just picture of love I just found so, so beautiful. What I didn't like, I mean, I don't know, this isn't really something I didn't like, but just know that the show is not for the faint of heart. Like, be prepared for profound emotional pain. Even romance-wise, even though they didn't necessarily do everything in the biblical sequence that they're supposed to happen in, I felt that it was very restrained and very sweet, and romantically the emphasis was all on the emotional romance, not on the physical. Okay, finally, number 1, Tale of the Nine-Tailed. Okay, you want to talk about having a lot of thoughts. So it is an epic urban fantasy kind of idea about a nine-tailed fox who's, again, just looks like a guy, who has for 600 years been waiting for the reincarnation of his dead love. And of course, when he finds her, it's not as simple as just like, oh, finding her in the present day. No, because there's like this ancient evil that's also been lurking and waiting all this time. This show just gave me everything I wanted in a show. Like, it just had all the things. Action sequences, great romance, even better bromance. A pretty big ensemble cast, which is fun in itself, but they were kind of likable all around. You had all these other kinds of love going on too. You had brother love, friendship love, grandmother-grandson love, like just so many different kinds of loyalty, and that was really touching to see, because I think it's important to see not just like romance put on the pedestal as like the most important kind of relationship, but to see how all of these kinds of relationships are all equally love. Awesome soundtrack, high intensity, high stakes, sufficiently dark but not too dark. There was mystery and stuff that you had to figure out, and in general it was epic, which is my favorite kind of story. The thing that I love about epic fantasy is that I feel like it's a genre that is so well suited to making like deeper spiritual points. And in this story, I felt like that was true. You had all these different kinds of love. You had these themes of like self-sacrifice going on. I felt like the climax, which was fantastic, actually had a lot of really interesting Christ parallels. And so it just hit hard, but in that really good way. What I didn't like. Just kidding. Okay, there are always gonna be things, moments that don't land or jokes that don't work or whatever. The romance is quite clean, like 99.99%. They do things out of order, but again, it cuts away, so we're not like present for that, which I very much appreciated. I will say one thing. Allow me to rant a moment longer. There is a sequel show, Tale of the Nine-Tailed 1938, and when I look online, I see nothing but rave reviews. Like, people seem to love it, but guys, I tried watching it right after I finished season 1, and I had to stop like halfway through the second episode because the shift in tone was so drastic. They just turned it into this like weird action comedy, and they like totally changed the character of the main character, who used to be like really on top of things and you couldn't get anything by him, and then they were making him look like this bumbling idiot, and I just still a little salty about that, still processing. I think I will probably end up watching 1938 just purely out of FOMO, and maybe in the hope that my expectations will be exceeded, but only when I can sufficiently separate the two in my mind so that one doesn't taint the other. Alright, thank you for indulging me, everybody, and shout out to my brother, who allows me to just have these conversations for indefinite periods of time, and he will ask follow-up questions and remember characters' names for later. So this is your sign to go and find the person in your life that allows you to do this and give them a hug. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for my next video, which will probably be something more craft related. And as always, do not forget to spend some time in the clouds today.